You know, it's amazing how sometimes what seems like just like a local little fight, one region kind of squabbling with another, can actually open up a window into like much bigger issues.
Yeah.
And a perfect example of that is this whole thing going on in Pakistan between the Punjab and Sindh provinces about water rights,
Mm.
specifically this Thal Canal project.
Right.
On the surface, it might just sound like, oh, this is about irrigation,
Yeah, yeah.
who gets how much water for their farms, but it really gets into some really fundamental challenges, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
I mean, what starts as this kind of seemingly, like you said, provincial squabble, just about how much water goes,
Yeah.
well, really reveals all these layers.
Yeah.
You start peeling it back and you see legal precedent, constitutional responsibilities, environmental concerns,
Right.
and of course, the always complicated dance between the federal government and the provinces.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got this set of materials that really kind of unpacks this whole thing. It lays out the legal and constitutional groundwork.
Yeah.
It gives us all the specifics about this Thal Canal project.
Uh-huh.
But our mission today is to kind of like cut through all of that and really understand what are the core things that are at stake here.
Right.
What are the different perspectives
Yeah.
and why does this conflict, which, again, sounds kind of regional,
Yeah.
actually have these implications that go way beyond just these two provinces.
Mm-hmm.
So think of this as your like crash course
Okay.
on this really intricate situation.
I like it.
All right, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
What are the absolute, foundational principles we need to get our heads around?
Well, the bedrock here really is the Constitution of Pakistan itself.
Okay.
Articles 9 and 14,
Mm-hmm.
which guarantee the right to life and the right to dignity,
Mm-hmm.
are interpreted as inherently requiring access to clean water.
Oh,
Now, there isn't a specific article that, puts it in black and white saying right to water.
right.
But that's the clear implication,
Yeah.
that without clean water, those fundamental rights are compromised.
Right. It makes intuitive sense. Like if you don't have,
Yeah,
if the very substance you need for life is either denied to you
right.
or polluted to the point where it's unusable, then yeah, your right to life is
Absolutely,
gone.
without a doubt.
So, okay, so we have that constitutional foundation.
Yeah.
What are the laws, the pieces of legislation that take that foundation and build on it in practical terms?
So we're looking at several significant laws here.
Okay.
The Pakistan Environmental Protection Act of 1997, or PEPA,
Okay.
is really important,
Mm-hmm.
especially Section 11. And this directly prohibits water pollution that exceeds the established national standards.
Okay.
And it lays out the penalties for violating those standards.
Right.
So it's really key to preventing the degradation of water sources.
Okay, so that's about safeguarding the quality
Yes,
of the water in the first place.
exactly.
What other legal instruments do we need to know about here?
Well, interestingly, we also have the Canal and Drainage Act of 1873.
Wow, okay.
And Section 70 of this act makes it a criminal offense to pollute canals, which is fascinating to think that need to protect waterways was recognized so long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it really highlights this long-standing awareness that water sources are vulnerable
Right.
and need to be protected.
So we have like a 19th century law that's still relevant today.
Still in effect, absolutely.
Okay, so what about more contemporary legislation?
Okay, so more recently, we have the Punjab Water Act of 2019.
Okay.
This mandates water conservation
Mm-hmm.
and, crucially for our conversation, the equitable allocation of water.
Okay.
So that means balancing the needs of agriculture, domestic use, and even ecological needs.
Right.
And then finally, we should mention the Pakistan Penal Code,
Okay.
Sections 268, which addresses public nuisance,
Uh-huh.
and Section 277, which specifically deals with fouling water.
Okay.
These provide another layer of legal protection against pollution.
So we have this, really comprehensive legal structure,
Mhm.
starting with constitutional principles, moving through these specific environmental laws,
Yeah.
including this fascinatingly old act about canals,
Yeah.
and then the broader criminal code, all aimed at protecting the public's access to clean water
Right.
and the health of the environment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's get into the specifics of this Thal Canal dispute.
Okay.
What are the arguments that each side is making?
So Punjab's position, from what we can see, is centered on this massive project.
Okay.
It's a 211 billion rupee project
Wow.
to develop these new canals.
Okay.
The Charleston and Morocco canals are the main components. And this project got approval from the Central Development Working Party, or CDWP,
Okay.
back in October 2024.
All right, and just so we're clear, what is the CDWP?
So the CDWP is this really important body
Okay,
that evaluates and approves these huge development projects
got it.
before they go to higher levels for authorization.
Okay, so Punjab's got this project. They
Uh-huh.
want to build these canals. What's the basis? What's the justification for doing this?
Their argument rests on a water availability certificate
Okay.
issued by the Indus River System Authority, or IRSA.
Okay.
Essentially, they're saying that IRSA, the federal body that regulates the whole Indus River system,
Uh-huh.
has certified that there's enough water in the system
Okay.
to build these canals without impacting other users.
All right, so that's Punjab's side.
Yeah,
Seems pretty straightforward.
yeah,
But we know Sindh has some serious objections.
they do.
So what are their main points? What are they pushing back against?
Well, Sindh's concerns are multifaceted, and they're really worried.
Okay.
Their primary worry is that this whole project is going to lead to a major diversion of water upstream,
Okay.
which will then drastically reduce the water flow downstream
Right.
to their barrages.
Mm-hmm.
And these barrages are absolutely vital for Sindh,
Okay.
for their agriculture, for drinking water,
Mm-hmm.
and for their ecosystems, especially the Indus River Delta.
Mhm.
So they see this as a direct threat to their water security.
Okay, so not just like a minor inconvenience. This is like an
and
existential threat.
they see it as a fundamental threat.
Right, to their well-being.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they're worried about the water itself.
Right.
But are they also challenging the process here, how this is all going down?
They are.
Okay.
So they're directly challenging the validity of that IRSA certification,
Okay, the one that Punjab is relying on.
the one that Punjab's hanging their hat on.
Right.
Sindh says that IRSA has gone beyond their authority.
Okay.
And really importantly, that they disregarded the 1991 Water Accord.
Okay, so this 1991 Water Accord seems like it's central to this whole thing.
Absolutely.
So for those of us who don't have it memorized, what is this accord? What does it say?
The 1991 Water Accord was meant to be this binding agreement on how to allocate the water from the Indus River system
Okay.
among the provinces.
So like who gets how much?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the rule book.
Okay.
But Sindh raises a couple of big problems with it.
Okay.
They say the data on water usage that was used to create the accord is super old.
How old?
It goes back to the period between 1977 and 1982,
Wow.
way before the Thal Canal was even on the table.
Okay.
And even more importantly, the Thal Canal was specifically excluded from that accord.
So Sindh's argument is like, you're using this agreement
Right.
to justify this project.
Exactly.
But the agreement doesn't even mention the project.
It's not even in there.
Wow. Okay. And is that all they're saying, or is there more?
There's more.
Okay.
Sindh also brings up these historical inequities
Okay.
that they say have made them more vulnerable.
Okay.
They point to the Indus Waters Treaty, which is an international agreement with India about water sharing.
Okay.
And they say the way the funds were distributed for related infrastructure projects really favored Punjab.
Okay.
So historically, they feel like they've been at a disadvantage.
Okay. So that adds like a whole other layer, this feeling of
Yeah.
past unfairness,
Absolutely.
fueling the current concerns. And Sindh's also raising concerns about the procedure,
Yes.
the way things have been done.
Exactly.
What are they saying specifically about that?
They point out that the first phase of the Thal Canal construction
Uh-huh.
actually started way back in 2001
Oh, wow.
without getting a no objection certificate or NOC from IRSA.
Okay.
And they criticized the CDWP approval in 2024
Right.
because the Executive Committee of the National Economic Council, ECEC,
Okay.
had said this whole issue needed to be resolved by the Council of Common Interests, or CCI.
Okay, so they're basically saying that things are moving forward
Right.
without proper authorization
Without the proper sign-off.
and in violation of the agreed-upon protocols.
Exactly.
So this isn't just about the water. This
Right.
is about procedure.
It's about process,
Fairness.
the rule of law,
Okay.
how these things are supposed to work.
So a potent mix of concerns,
Real cocktail.
the potential water scarcity,
Yeah.
this historical sense of unfairness, and these fundamental questions about how decisions are made.
Huge questions about governance.
Okay, so that brings us to this Council of Common Interests, the CCI.
Right.
You know, our sources say that this is like the main way
Yeah.
that the Constitution says to deal with these kinds of disputes
Yeah.
between provinces over shared resources,
Uh-huh.
especially water.
That's the idea.
So what's its intended role?
So constitutionally, under Article 153, the CCI is the main forum for this kind of thing.
Okay.
And Article 155 gives it specific powers.
Like what?
Things like formulating national water policies,
Okay.
recommending presidential commissions to investigate if needed,
Uh-huh.
and generally acting as a mediator.
Right. So it sounds like it has the authority to step in and fix this.
On paper, yes.
So what are the limitations? What are the things that stop it from working as well as it should?
The biggest problem is that the CCI needs consensus to do anything.
Okay.
So the prime minister who chairs the CCI
Uh-huh.
and all the chief ministers of the provinces,
Mm.
they all have to agree
For a decision to be binding.
for anything to happen.
Okay.
And historically, it's had a hard time enforcing its decisions.
Even when there have been clear violations of the Water Accord.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So consensus can lead to deadlock.
It often does, especially when the interests of different provinces are so far apart.
Yeah, that makes sense. And where does this Thal Canal dispute stand with the CCI right now?
Well, Sindh filed a complaint with the CCI about the Thal Canal back in July 2024.
Okay.
But as of right now, they haven't made a decision.
So that delay itself speaks to these challenges we're talking about.
It really does. It's hard to get everyone on the same page.
And it takes time.
And all that time erodes trust
Right.
in the system.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about the environmental side of this.
Right.
Sindh's worried about potential damage to ecosystems.
Yeah.
So how do these water rights issues tie into environmental protection?
This is where things get really interesting. Remember we talked about PEPA, the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act?
Yeah, from 1997.
Right. Sindh is saying that the reduction in water flow
Yeah.
that they think is going to happen because of the Thal Canal
Uh-huh.
could really hurt the river ecosystems,
Okay.
which are protected under PEPA.
So what kind of damage are we talking about?
Well, less water flow can lead to higher salinity,
Right.
loss of habitat for animals,
Mm-hmm.
and just a general decline in biodiversity,
Especially in that delta region.
especially in that delta, which is really delicate.
So it's not just about having enough water for people.
Yes.
It's about keeping the environment healthy.
It's about the whole ecosystem.
Right. And that ties back into Sindh's right to water.
Absolutely.
If the water they get is less,
Yeah.
or if it's damaged,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a violation of their fundamental rights.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Wow. Okay, so one province's development
Right.
could actually harm another province's environment?
That's the concern.
And are there other governance challenges besides the CCI consensus issue?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We talked about how Sindh feels IRSA overstepped its bounds with that water availability certificate.
Right.
But there are also issues within the CCI itself.
Okay. Like what?
Well, they're supposed to meet every 90 days,
Uh-huh.
but they don't always stick to that.
So those delays make it harder to resolve things.
Yeah, they really drag things out.
And it creates distrust.
It erodes confidence in the whole system.
So a system that maybe looks good on paper,
Right.
but in practice.
In practice, it's struggling.
Okay, now let's zoom out even further.
Okay.
Let's look at the international context.
All right.
What do international laws say about water sharing?
This is where the conversation gets really big.
Okay.
Our sources point to a couple of key principles from international law.
Okay.
First, there's the doctrine of prior appropriation.
And what does that mean?
Basically, it favors whoever started using the water first.
Oh, interesting.
So in this case, Sindh's barrages and irrigation systems.
Yeah.
They existed long before the Thal Canal was even an idea.
Okay.
So this doctrine could actually strengthen Sindh's case.
If this were looked at in an international court or something.
Exactly.
So first come, first served.
In a nutshell.
Oh.
Oh.
Well, okay. What other international principles are relevant here?
Well, there's also the UN Water Courses Convention,
Okay.
which is all about using shared water resources fairly and reasonably.
Okay.
It says that countries that share a river
Mm-hmm.
have to use it in a way that's fair to everyone
Okay.
and doesn't cause harm.
Right.
So the idea here is that Pakistan needs to make sure its own water laws
Yeah.
line up with these international standards.
So fairness and avoiding harm.
Exactly.
And that definitely echoes what Sindh is saying.
For sure.
Okay, so we've looked at the laws in Pakistan. We've
Yeah.
looked at the arguments of both sides,
Mhm.
the role of the CCI,
Right.
the environmental impact, and
Yeah.
even these international laws. So based on all of that, what are the main takeaways from our sources?
Well, they really emphasize that Pakistan needs to actually enforce those constitutional safeguards.
Okay, the ones about the CCI?
Yes, Articles 153 to 155.
Right.
They need to give the CCI more power.
To actually enforce its decisions.
Right now, it's kind of toothless.
Yeah, if you can't enforce agreements, then what's the point of having them?
Exactly.
What else do the sources highlight?
They say there needs to be serious legal scrutiny
Okay.
of this whole Thal Canal project.
Okay.
Did they do the environmental impact assessment?
Right, as required by PIPA.
Exactly.
And does the water allocation plan follow the 1991 Water Accord?
Those are big questions.
So really digging into the specifics of the project.
Absolutely.
Making sure everything's by the book.
Yeah.
What else?
They also say that the federal government and the provinces need to work together better.
Okay.
More coordination.
More communication.
And IRSA, the Indus River System Authority,
Yeah.
they need to be more transparent.
Okay, so basically, being more open
Yes,
can help build trust.
absolutely.
And then finally, the sources emphasize prioritizing environmental rights
Right.
in all these decisions about water.
In everything.
So if you want a sustainable system
Yeah.
and a fair system,
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about the environment.
It has to be front and center.
So strengthening the Constitution,
Yep.
making sure everyone follows the laws,
Uh.
better communication, and
Oh.
putting the environment first.
Those are the key points.
It's a lot.
It is, but it's all connected.
Okay, so stepping back from all the details.
Yeah.
What are the big picture takeaways here?
This dispute over the Thal Canal shows just how complicated it is to manage shared resources,
Especially something like water,
especially water, which is essential.
especially in a federal system.
Right, where you have different levels of government
Yeah.
with sometimes competing interests.
And you've got these long-standing historical issues.
Yeah, those don't just go away.
Right. And then you layer on top of that the urgency of climate change and environmental protection.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And the laws are there.
Right.
But enforcing them and making sure everyone trusts the system,
That's the challenge.
it's like building that trust is the key.
It really is.
Because without trust.
Nothing works.
Exactly. Okay, so we're seeing this tension between development, Punjab wanting to grow its agriculture, and the rights and concerns of Sindh downstream.
And the environment.
And the environment as a whole.
It's a classic dilemma.
It is, and it highlights how important it is
Yeah.
to have these institutions that are strong and trustworthy
Yeah.
to mediate these conflicts.
Otherwise, it just turns into chaos.
Right. So to sum up for you, our listener,
Yeah.
we took this deep dive into the Thal Canal dispute, and we found this tangled web
We did.
of legal rights, historical grievances, environmental worries, and these fundamental questions about how things are governed.
About how the system works.
So hopefully now you understand what's really going on here and why it's so much bigger
Than just a local fight.
than just a local fight.
It's about so much more.
And what I think is fascinating is that it shows how a dispute over something like water, something so basic,
So essential.
can touch on so many aspects of a country.
Yeah.
The laws, the politics, the environment.
It's all intertwined.
And it makes you think about how we balance these competing needs.
Right.
Development versus sustainability.
That's the big question.
Individual rights versus the common good.
How do we make sure everyone has what they need?
Exactly. And how do we do that while protecting the planet?
The million-dollar question.
And with that in mind, here's a thought for you, listener.
Okay.
What other situations do you see where we might have these same kinds of conflicts
Yeah.
over resources?
Over land. Over energy.
Yeah.
It's happening everywhere.
And what principles should guide how we resolve these conflicts?
Mm.
Not just for peace,
All right.
but for the long-term health of the environment.
That's the long game.
That's the long game.
We have to think generations ahead.
It's definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.